Thanks a lot for joining us. It's time to talk about what could be in store for Canada's 2026 wildfire season. And I'm joined by Mike Flannigan, who's a wildfire expert and professor at Thompson Rivers University. Thanks so much for being with us, Mike.
Oh, my pleasure, Kyle.
All right, well, let's get straight into it. Okay, so taking a look at the current fire situation across the country from CIFC here, Mike, only seeing three small out of control fires. So what's going on out there? Looks like a lot quieter of a start to the season.
It has been a quiet start. I mean, there's fires in BC and Alberta, but as you say, most of them are either under control or being held, and then just a smattering across the rest of the country.
Yeah, it's sure nice to see how things are starting out a little bit quieter this year. We can also look at Natural Resources Canada's newly redesigned website, the Canadian Wildland Fire Information System site. Basically, you just saw that same map here displayed, but they've also got a whole bunch of other information displayed now, making it a lot more user-friendly. What do you think of this site?
Yeah, it's updated and there's a lot of information there, and people should check it out. The CIFC site has also been updated recently, and there's lots on there as well. So, yeah, it's great to see information at our fingertips.
Absolutely. For Canadians wanting to keep tabs on the fire situation, it's a lot easier this year. Another example of some of the data that's displayed on that Natural Resources Canada site. Here's our year-to-date fire statistics. And you can see the URL down here in the bottom corner. Just shy of 6,000 hectares burned at this time, May 18th. When looking back at the 5 or 10 year average, I mean, we've been very active in recent years, but we're well below that area burned, even with a similar, close to average total number of wildfires, well below what we've seen kind of based on our 10-year averages.
Yeah, it's been a quiet start, but May's not a busy month across much of Canada. 2023 and 2025 maybe being exceptions, except for Alberta. May is the busiest month for area burned in Alberta. No other jurisdiction has May as the busiest month.
Yeah, absolutely. And another way to kind of visualize that last piece of information we can see there. Again, this is based on the 10-year average. So it's kind of skewed. I mean, like Mike is saying, Alberta's wildfire season can peak in the month of May. But as you can see here, I mean, we're well below normal. So haven't really had,
Yeah.
no significant like air quality events. A nice break for a lot of folks. I think it's kind of like, it's been really active the last few years, but 2022 is a lot quieter, wasn't it, relatively speaking?
Yeah, though I will mention there are impacts, even though there's only been 5,000 hectares. Sandy Beach lost three homes, and there was evacuation near Whitecourt last week. So it's kind of like real estate, location, location, location. So yes, quiet in terms of number area burned, but there has been some impacts already.
Absolutely. You can certainly still have small impactful wildfires. And actually, we do tend to see that a lot, right? In the springtime, more human-caused fires. The fuels are really dry, and a lot of these things accidentally or mostly accidentally starting near communities, so they can be small but still impactful.
Yes, we're what we call the spring window. After the snow melts, you have all the dead organic material from the previous year, and it only takes a day or two of warm, dry, windy weather, and the fine fuels are ready to burn.
Another map that you can see, this is an interactive map, also from the CWFIS website, and you can also overlay a whole bunch of different data on there and even export those maps. So check it out. And again, here we're looking at our fire weather index forecast for May 18th, and pretty cool out there. Kind of checks out. I mean, we've seen it hotter. It was really warm and dry the first half of May. There are still some smatterings of, sort of high or very high fire danger here in parts of central Northeast BC, northern Alberta, southern Northwest Territories, but pretty cool in other parts of the country. Sometimes the kind of grassland region here too has been heating up, and doesn't take long for those areas to kind of dry out as well.
Yeah, overall, a fairly quiet picture.
For sure. And I kind of looking at why that is. I mean, this is our 120-day temperature anomaly, so difference from normal. And we can see it's been quite a bit cooler than normal across much of the north and into the Canadian prairies. This is basically going back through the latter half of winter, rather, and the kind of the first half of spring. So this is certainly playing a role. But, you look west of the Rockies, quite a bit of a different picture there. This sort of warmer than average conditions that have kind of persisted through the winter, extending into southern and central BC. So, of course, things are a lot warmer and kind of drier in that area, right?
Yeah.
For sure. And again, looking at our precipitation anomaly for the same period going back to sort of mid January, there are pockets where it's been wet. For example, the eastern BC interior and the Rocky Mountains, beefy mountain snowpack in those areas, which is a nice relief, especially compared to last year at this time. Parts of the northern prairies as well. Recent snow and in late season snow has really improved things there and kind of staved off the worst, especially compared to last year at this time. These areas were totally on fire. So this is a nice relief for those areas. Drier across much of Quebec and Labrador, but there's still some lingering snowpack out there in this region here, and conditions are expected to stay somewhat cooler and wetter than normal out there for a while.
Yeah, but the snow will go. Okay? And the sun's getting really strong, so even though the temperatures may be cool, that sun can eat the snow.
For sure. How that's kind of played out in our Canadian drought monitor map here. We still do see some pockets of drought here across the Northwest Territories, far northern Manitoba, parts of northern Quebec and Labrador, as well as the southern part of Alberta, southwest Saskatchewan, southern and central interior BC. But overall, looks quite a bit different than last year at this time.
Yeah, the last few years actually, this is much improved in terms of abnormally dry and drought conditions. And sometimes I don't think our Canadian forest fire danger rating system completely captures drought, in a wholesome manner. So I always take a look at this drought map and say those are areas with potential for an active fire season.
Yeah, for sure. And again, I think based on this map here, eventually, these areas will tend to emerge a little bit later into, I guess, early summer perhaps. And I'd say, BC, you tend to see, west of the Rockies, this region starts to pick up kind of later July, August, but, it could be earlier this year if this trend continues with how dry it is in parts of the southern and central interior.
Yeah, it could be early. It depends if we get a June heat wave. It could even be in June.
Yeah, like 2021 for sure.
Yeah.
You get a heat dome event like that, things can take off a lot earlier. But I guess it also makes sense to talk about the fact that, just because you have drought here, or you don't have drought in some areas doesn't mean you can't have wildfire with, prolonged warm, dry, windy weather. You may not necessarily even have drought on this map, but like you think back to 2023, there wasn't really any drought on the drought monitor map here in Quebec, and they took off after that lightning outbreak with that warm, windy weather.
Yeah, the disclaimer is no one knows the future, and our fire season will depend on the day-to-day weather, particularly hot, dry, windy days, and ignitions, the number of ignitions, locations, and yeah, so we have to wait and see. But we've had 3 very active fire seasons in a row. In our modern day record, we've never had 3 years like that. Over 8% of our forest is burned in the last 3 years. And to me, 2026 is a litmus test. If we have another active fire season, and this one, if it's going to be active, it's going to be more like 2024, given the slow start. But I'm going to say that most years are going to be active if that's the case. I always used to say we get breaks. And hopefully, regionally, we always will see cooler weather periods. But nationally, we're a big country, and it seems like we're getting conducive fire weather just about every year now. So I'm watching this year with interest.
Definitely. Taking a look at what could be to come, how things could change just in the coming days. We'll look at a few forecasts here. This is from the European Ensemble. Just the next 10 days or so. Mixed signals across the country, cooler across the east, and cool as well in much of the Yukon and northern central BC. Warmer than normal across much of Nunavut, Northwest Territories, northern prairies, but overall, no really significant signals for extreme heat or extreme cold for that matter. Kind of typical changeable spring weather, and as well in terms of the precipitation anomaly where things could be a little wetter than normal in the next 10 days. East of the Rockies, again, northern parts of the prairies, southern Northwest Territories, that'll certainly be helpful in this area for staving off any early uptick in the wildfire activity, as well as across much of Ontario and Quebec. I know they had a couple of higher profile wildfire starts that are already, I think those fires are now being held, but this is certainly going to be helpful in the near term. BC as well, a little bit dry, but again, not really expecting southern BC to pick up in intensity in the very near term. And taking a look beyond that, this is our 46-day forecast, the European weeklies. Again, no real strong signal for extreme heat anywhere, even a little bit of a cool signal across Western Canada right now. So that would be, fairly good news. Again, perhaps a slower start to fire season. Again, this doesn't look like things are going to ramp up in the near term for us. It looks like, if anything, we're looking at a more active back half of the season. So again, looking at our precipitation anomaly, for the next 46 days east of the Rockies, fairly wet signal. Again, these forecasts have lower skill, but in general, this is a fairly good kind of trend for kind of staving off an active season, at least to start east of the Rockies. But west of the Rockies here, we can see this sort of kind of a significant transition from really wet conditions along the Alaska coast there, parts of southwest Yukon. Very dry signal here in BC. This looks like a fairly active storm track here, with all the storms getting pushed off this direction, and kind of looks like an upper ridge kind of in Western Canada there, with really dry conditions in BC. So again, this does not bode well for the latter half of fire season out west.
That's concerning for BC, because we've had our fair share of fire since 2017, a record-breaking year, and about 16% of our forest is burned in BC since 2017, which is just an amazing number.
Incredible. A lot of that, I guess. I mean, there's a lot of that's been in the central and southern interior, but there's also a huge chunk up there in the northeast corner, right?
Yeah. That northeast corner had multi-year drought, and they had fires that started in 2023 that I think at least one of them is still burning. It may not be on the map, but it's still smoldering.
Wow. Fourth year. Now we're going to take a look out beyond that into our seasonal forecast here. This is from the Copernicus Climate Change Service, the C3S long-range forecast here, based on a number of different government agencies, June, July, August forecast for this year. And fairly good agreement, again, that this will be a warmer than normal summer, and that warmth focused in Western Canada, British Columbia, Alberta, perhaps parts of the southern prairies, and the northwestern U.S. there.
Yeah, that's where I expect the action to pick up is the Pacific Northwestern United States. I mean, their snowpack was almost non-existent. And with the heat, if you get some ignitions, watch out. For sure.
Our precipitation, long-range precipitation forecasts, again, you got to take these a little bit more with a grain of salt. But I do like this kind of signal here, this, for what it's worth, in the western U.S., like Mike was saying, very abysmal snowpack in the western U.S., looking at water supply problems and also the risk of significant wildfire danger increasing through the summer. But there's a fairly wet signal that's emerging here in the west, and some of that could kind of extend into Western Canada. Mixed signals across much of the country, near normal, some drier than normal along the BC coast and in parts of the central prairies into northwestern Ontario. Again, for what it's worth at this point, it could go either way with this one. But this would be good news, at least for parts of the western U.S., if this materialized.
As long as it doesn't bring thunderstorms and lots of lightning with it, which could cause some ignitions. So double-edged sword, perhaps.
For sure. Yeah, it could certainly go that way. And now, based on the same time frame, June, July, August here, 2026, one thing that you've probably heard in news media recently, Super El Nino is coming. This is something that everyone's talking about. What is the Super El Nino? Well, let's break down. We're going to actually take a look here, a fairly in-depth look at what El Nino is. And so basically, this is a sea surface temperature anomaly map for the same pattern, the same time frame, June, July, August. So this summer. And we can see here, temperatures are 2 or more degrees above normal during this period. At least they're forecast based on all of these different kind of the agreement between all these different climate models here. And where the El Nino is sort of measured is in this region here. Specifically, it's called the Niño 3.4 region. It goes from 170 west to 120 west, 5 north and 5 south degrees latitude. And, so your El Nino, when you have what's called a very strong or extreme, or what they're calling a super El Nino, you have to have 5 consecutive 3-month periods where this area is warmer than normal by at least 2 degrees. So Some forecast models are really kind of, we're getting into potentially record-breaking territory. So we'll see how it pans out, but we're already starting to see signs in the oceans and the atmosphere that this could be materializing, and we'll take a look at that here in a second. But how the El Nino basically shapes up is this is kind of the typical pattern here, where the central and eastern tropical Pacific warms up much more than normal. And so you'll tend to see, reduced, we'll talk about a little bit more about it in a moment, but it's called upwelling. So you don't get as much cold water here off the west coast of South America. That the reason it's called an El Nino, it's named after its little boy or the boy child, because fishermen in Peru back in the day discovered that there were times when the ocean was warmer than normal and the fishing was really poor. And that happened around Christmas time. That's the boy child, the Christ child. So that's where the sort of the name of El Nino comes from. But there's other factors besides El Nino, especially in the summertime, that the influence of this El Nino in the summer is a little bit lost in the noise compared to the winter. How things typically are with the El Nino southern oscillation pattern. So again, El Nino is the warm phase, and La Nina is the cool phase. We also have a neutral phase where it's neither warmer or cooler than normal. This is a naturally occurring climate driver pattern, and probably the most important climate pattern for climate variability, year-to-year variability that we see. And so basically what happens in normal or neutral conditions, when it's neither warmer or cooler than normal along the equatorial Pacific, you'll have our easterly trade winds that are always blowing there in the equatorial Pacific that tends to pile up warmer ocean waters here in the western Pacific. And it's cooler than, temperatures are cooler in the eastern Pacific as a result of that. What happens when you have that sort of wind stress on the top of the ocean is you push that ocean surface this way. It actually piles up a little bit higher. The sea surface is higher in the western Pacific as a result of that, lower in the eastern Pacific, and it causes what's called upwelling, and that's that colder air, colder water that sort of replaces it from below, and you get cooler temperatures in this region. So you'll get kind of more active thunderstorms in this area where the sea surface temperatures are warmer. What happens in a La Nina, which is sort of the opposite of what's taking shape right now, and what we've seen several times, actually, we've seen more frequent La Nina in recent years than El Nino. These trade winds really start to ramp up, and you just kind of really just ramp up that last pattern we were talking about, making it even more extreme, where that upwelling is more intense. You get colder than normal sea surface temperatures in the eastern and central tropical Pacific, and warmer than normal in the west. And so you get more vigorous thunderstorm activity here in what's called the maritime continent around, Indonesia and Southeast Asia. Thunderstorm activity in this region. But what happens in an El Nino is those trade winds can weaken or even reverse. And you can have these bursts of westerly winds that are kind of unusual across the surface of the western Pacific. And that can trigger the beginning of an El Nino. You really shut down that upwelling here. And you can actually kind of, like I was saying, the ocean surface normally kind of slopes up into the west, but it actually can kind of level out. And you can kind of slosh that warm water eastward back across the Pacific. And so that's what we're seeing here. This map is a little bit kind of confusing to look at initially, but what you're looking at here is a cross section of about the top 500 meters of the ocean surface along the equatorial Pacific. On this part, it's going to be over in the Indonesia area, and over here, you're going to be over toward the south coast, the west coast of South America. And what you're seeing here are warmer than normal conditions, well below the surface of the ocean. And this area is moving eastward across the ocean. And that's, again, as a result of those weakened trade winds. So you're seeing this wave. It's actually, for those who want to nerd out a bit, it's called a Kelvin wave. And it's pushing eastward across the equatorial Pacific. And as soon as it starts to surface, these well above normal temperatures start to surface in the eastern and central tropical Pacific. That's when you start to see that El Nino really starting to ramp up. And what that can do, of course, is ramp up our thunderstorm activity in this area, which gives off a lot of heat to the upper atmosphere. It can actually reshape jet stream patterns, global wind patterns that affect our weather thousands of kilometers away. Now, like I said before, that's a bigger thing in the winter months. In the summer, that effect can kind of get lost in the noise. But what we're looking at here now is based on May 17th, just yesterday. This is our sea surface temperature anomaly map. As of yesterday, you can start to see that El Nino emerging in the tropical Pacific here, especially off the west coast of South America. The other thing I wanted to look at is this big blob of abnormally warm temperatures in the North Pacific, east of Japan. This has been here for several years now. And we've been seeing sort of a similar climate regime since 2020 as a result of this. And there's another sort of oscillating pattern on a longer scale. It's called the Pacific Decadal Oscillation. And typically, we'll have, when you have it warmer in this area, it'll be relatively cooler, kind of along the coast of North America. But things are looking like really warm everywhere, especially off Mexico and California here. This is an ongoing significant marine heat wave that's going to play a role in how summer plays out. And there's some research that suggests that the reason for this sort of change in these sea surface temperature patterns across the North Pacific in general could be tied to anthropogenic forcing. And the reason for that, one of those reasons could be the fact that in recent years, we've been really cleaning up our air pollution, reducing the amount of sulfur dioxide from emissions, but that's actually reducing the amount of sulfate aerosols in the atmosphere, which can cool the atmosphere. So if you remove those, you clean up the air pollution, but then you actually unmask a lot of the background warming from greenhouse gases. And that can actually be changing the expression of sea surface temperature patterns in the Pacific. And so we've never seen this exact type pattern in the past. And it makes it a lot more uncertain as to how things could play out in the future with this exact climate regime. Nonetheless, with this amount of warm water across the ocean, and especially if this significant, strong El Nino, very strong El Nino emerges, you're giving off a lot more heat to the atmosphere than normal. And so, of course, this can make extreme weather events more frequent, more extreme. We're talking about, heat waves. We're talking about drought conditions, potentially floods, because you can hold more moisture in the atmosphere in a warmer atmosphere. So these are all factors. I'm kind of getting into the weeds a little bit. I'm going to steer us back, but these are all factors that we want to consider when looking at El Nino and the sort of current climate regime. Now, is there anything you'd like to add so far at this point, Mike?
Just that, climate change is changing how El Nino and ENSO events are playing out. And so we're kind of in uncharted territory. So we kind of have to see what happens.
Absolutely. Now, again, looking at what could come this summer, we're looking at 3 of our top analog years that looked most similar to how things are going to shape up. That was the last 3 super El Ninos, 1982-83, 97-98, and 2015-2016. Again, summertime, you tend to see, a lot more mixed signals out there, but you do have a fairly consistent signal of below normal heights in the atmosphere. It just basically means your atmospheric, the height of the column of your atmosphere is lower because the air is cooler in the eastern part of the continent, and near normal or maybe a little bit above normal in the west. So that can result in sort of mixed signals of precipitation across the country. We don't know what kind of precipitation patterns we're going to be seeing across the country this summer. In terms of temperatures, some correlation with cooler than normal temperatures across the eastern part of the country and near or above normal temperatures in the west. And that kind of reflects that forecast that we were looking at. But when we look at that other climate regime I've been talking about since 2020, this negative phase of the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, just again, this warm blob extending across the central North Pacific, and these relatively cooler temperatures in here, seems to be kind of forcing a certain upper air pattern that's making heat, drought, and even wildfire activity more likely downstream in North America. And again, this is from NOAA. You can see this Pacific Decadal Oscillation Index. You can see that we've kind of since 2020 really dipped into a really strong negative phase. And actually last summer we hit record-breaking strength of the negative phase of the PDO. But again, it doesn't look like a typical PDO looked in the past. Like you would typically have much cooler than normal temperatures here. So that's again what we were talking about. This warmth out here, this is unusual. That strong negative signal is likely coming from just how warm it is in this area here. But what that can do is affect our weather downstream. And again, for anyone who wants to look into that, specifically what we were talking about, how human emissions can drive some of these recent trends in the North Pacific, here's a paper from Nature. Again, what we've seen in recent summers is more upper ridging in Western Canada, which is associated with sinking air, warming temperatures, less cloud than normal, less precipitation than normal in a lot of areas. And again, this isn't the case all the time, But this is sort of how things have shaped out in the last 5 or 6 years. And you tend to see much warmer than normal conditions across North America. That El Nino signal not really as present in the summertime because you tend to be kind of transitioning, more frequent La Nina conditions recently. So this is another factor that we could consider this summer. And again, since about 2020, right about here, this is from the North American Drought Monitor, we can see it seems to be correlated that we're seeing more drought in North America by land area, with this current climate regime, again, that causes that sort of upper ridge just west of the coast. And it kind of like prevents the amount of moisture that enters the continent. And there is some research that shows that like in our paleoclimate record, our tree ring record, that some of the most significant like mega droughts, we're talking decadal droughts in Western North America, were associated with a similar North Pacific climate pattern, with that negative PDO. So that's another thing we want to consider for this summer. And Mike, again, I just wanted to say, like, again, based on our last five or so years, 4 out of the last 5 have seen well above average area burn: 2023, 2025, 2024, and 2021 here.
Yeah, but you can see that May's relatively quiet, in terms of the average. It's 2003 2025 average is pretty quiet. The last 5 to 10 years have been much more active, and so I still think 2024 may be a good analog for us as the fire season kicks into gear mid to late season. And that's when we see the heat impact. The warmer we get, the more fire I expect. Yes, we need the ignitions and you need those hot, dry, windy days, but generally warmer is conducive. Warmer and drier is even more conducive to that situation.
Yeah. As you're saying here, you can see this light, faint gray line here is our normals. And that 2024 season Mike's talking about here is that kind of dark blue line. We're below normal until mid-July and then suddenly take off for the latter half of the season. So yeah, that certainly seems like it could be a better analog for this year.
Possibility, yeah.
Certainly. Again, we were talking about how we're sort of in uncharted waters here, but we're now just kind of to round out the end of this presentation here, we're going to talk about what maybe 2027 could bring. Typically, you wouldn't want to look that far into the future, but when you have such a strong signal coming from this El Nino, very high confidence of a very strong El Nino, this is going to persist through the winter and be very strong in the winter, which can set us up for 2027's wildfire season. So the typical wintertime El Nino pattern, you'll have warmer than normal temperatures focused especially in Western Canada and across the northern tier of the United States. But this is not just a typical El Nino. This is a very strong so-called super El Nino, and that can actually shift this whole pattern eastward. And basically what we're looking at here again is where we're seeing unusually high heights. Again, you tend to see this upper ridge in the atmosphere here over central and eastern parts of the country, which is associated with much warmer than normal temperatures. So again, fairly high confidence in this winter temperature forecast that much of the country, north of the 49th parallel, across the northern states too, but most of Canada likely warmer than normal in this scenario. And if we think back to the last very strong El Nino we had, 2015, 2016, we all remember what happened in northern Alberta and Fort McMurray, May 2016. After a very warm and dry winter, you have earlier melting of the snowpack, you can have earlier heat. And so this could potentially set us up for a fairly active start to 2027, Mike.
Yeah, a warm, dry winter, and we're ready to burn right away. So yeah, I know it's, almost a year away, but, if this strong El Nino comes, which the models suggest and indications are it's coming, we're somewhat confident that it's going to be a warm, dry winter, which sets us up for an active fire season.
For sure. And for anyone who's interested in that specific sort of teleconnection pattern with that very strong El Nino, there's been a paper written about this exact topic that we were just talking about, and this is what it's called. So kind of to round out here, pretty exciting news here from Mike. He's got a new Canada Fire Weather Outlook. Mike, talk us through about what this is here.
So, there's no publicly available 5 to 10 day fire weather forecast. So I thought, why not build one and do do the forecast. And every Tuesday, I pump out a 5 to 10 day forecast, what's coming. And really, it's kind of like an early warning system. We often see those blocking ridges set up, 7 to 10 days in advance. So I want to give early warning when these situations occur, and maybe have an opportunity to, you know, tell people about the fire weather index system, different components of it, whether it's the DMC, depth moisture code and lightning, ISI, initial spread index, and spread days for fire. So kind of educational tool. If you have any suggestions, feedback, glad to hear it. And you can subscribe there. The link's down at the bottom. And yeah, keep your eye open because I'll be pumping these out all fire season.
That's super exciting. I'm super excited to read those myself. Anything else that Canadians should be considering looking forward into this summer here? I mean, looks like we're probably not going to be dealing with significant wildfire smoke, at least to start the summer. Maybe later in the summer, though, what should we be thinking about?
Yeah, we should be watching later in the season. Lightning's the primary ignition source during the summer, but that doesn't mean that we can be lax with human-caused fires. And if you see a fire, report it right away. Most jurisdictions have a phone number, a cell number you can call. Some have great apps like BC, where you can actually take a picture of the fire and report the fire that way. So yeah, be vigilant with fire, respect fire, and if you see it, report it right away.
Absolutely. And so lots of great tools now available this summer for folks who want to follow up and keep track of the fire situation. Mike's new Canada Fire Weather Outlook. And of course, we've got the newly redesigned CIFC and Natural Resources Canada CWFIS websites. Check that out, follow along. And until next time, it's been great chatting with you. We'll talk to you then.